I'll marry the first woman who comes in here," said the millionaire, and when the door opened, Ethan Carter was the kind of man whose name echoed across boardrooms, stock exchanges, and the glossy covers of Forbes, Fortune, and every financial magazine worth mentioning. By 35 years old, he had built one of the largest technology empires in the United States. His name was synonymous with innovation, brilliance, and an almost inhuman level of determination. From artificial intelligence to renewable energy, there was no frontier his companies had not conquered. His penthouse in Manhattan overlooked the shimmering skyline, a constant reminder that there was nothing in this world he could not buy. Nothing, except the one thing that money had always seemed to elude him: love. It was ironic. For a man capable of decoding complex algorithms and forecasting market trends with frightening accuracy, the formula for happiness had remained a mystery. Relationships had come and gone, most of them fleeting, transactional, or suffocated under the shadow of his wealth. Every time he tried to connect with someone, he was met with a gnawing doubt: were they here for him, or for the billion-dollar fortune attached to his last name? On this particular morning, the air in Manhattan was crisp, with a gentle drizzle misting the sidewalks. Ethan sat in his usual spot at the Velvet Bean, a luxurious yet surprisingly quiet café, tucked between Fifth Avenue and East 52nd. A sanctuary where deals were signed, secrets whispered, and fortunes quietly shifted hands. Across the table sat his two closest companions, not friends, at least not in the traditional sense, but the people who had been with him long enough to almost qualify. Lucas Grant, his personal attorney, was meticulous, sharp, and always dressed like the law itself had stitched his suits. Beside him, Ava Sinclair, his PR strategist, had the air of a woman who knew how to manipulate the narrative of the world like a puppeteer with her marionettes. They had met to discuss a crisis, a story brewing in the tabloids about Ethan's latest failed relationship. The headlines were merciless: "The billionaire who can't buy love," and "Ethan Carter, genius in business, disaster in romance." It was not the first time. It would not be the last. Ethan. Ava sighed, brushing a stray lock of platinum hair behind her ear. "We can spin this, like always. Damage control. But honestly, people are starting to think you're incapable of love." Lucas added. "Investors value stability. Maybe it is time to consider settling down. Even for appearances. You know how." Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, expression unreadable. His piercing gray eyes scanned the room, watching people come and go: lawyers, models, executives, influencers. All dressed in perfection, all masked in some way. "I'm done with appearances," he said flatly. "I'm tired of pretending." Ava arched a brow. "Then what? You are just going to give up on love?" Ethan tapped his fingers on the oak table, thoughtful. "No. Maybe it is time to stop overthinking it. Stop searching, stop calculating." He glanced toward the entrance as a new wave of customers entered, each lost in their own little worlds. Then, without warning, a wild idea, perhaps born from frustration, perhaps from a deeper emptiness, slipped past his lips before logic could catch it. "I'll marry the first woman who walks through that door," he declared. Ava's mouth dropped open. Lucas choked on his espresso. "Excuse me?" Lucas sputtered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Lost your mind? Ethan, have you?" "I am dead serious," Ethan said, locking eyes with both of them. "I'm done with chasing illusions. If fate wants to play a hand, then let it. The next woman who walks through that door, I'll marry her." Ava stared, searching for signs of sarcasm. There were none. Know who it'll be. It could be anyone. You can't be serious. You don't. Exactly. His voice was calm, steady. Decides. Anyone. No pretense. No games. Just, whoever fate. Lucas ran a hand over his face. Your company. This is reckless. This could ruin everything. Your reputation. Or. Ethan countered. It could be the most honest decision I've ever made. For a moment, the cafe grew quiet around their table, as if the universe itself paused to process what had just been said. Even Ava, whose job revolved around controlling chaos, seemed momentarily stunned into silence. Then, as if perfectly cued by the unseen hand of destiny, the brass handle of the cafe scranned. Double doors turned. The bell chimed softly, an innocuous, everyday sound that suddenly carried the weight of 1,000 possibilities. All eyes at the table turned toward the entrance. A hush seemed to fall over the immediate area, as conversations dipped, cups paused midway to lips, and the subtle hum of the espresso machine faded into the background of collective curiosity. The door opened. Time slowed. And then she walked in. Her appearance was in sharp contrast to the polished patrons of the Velvet Bean. She wore jeans faded by time rather than design, sneakers that had seen better days, and a simple cream-colored sweater dotted with raindrops from the mist outside. In her hands, she carried a large cardboard box balanced awkwardly on one hip, labeled in black marker, Olivia's Floral Deliveries. Her hair, dark as raven's wings, was pulled into a messy braid that swung gently as she maneuvered through the doorway, clearly flustered, clearly unaware that half the cafe had stopped breathing. Ethan's heart thudded, not out of love, not yet, but out of sheer disbelief. Was this really happening? Ava broke the silence first, whispering under her breath. Oh, my God. Lucas muttered. Tell me you are not seriously considering going through with this. But Ethan did not answer them. He stood, smooth and certain, as though this moment had always been meant to happen. His chair slid back with a soft scrape against the marble floor. His hands were steady. His gaze fixed only on her. The woman with the box paused, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. Her eyes, a shade of green so vivid it made the world seem sharper, darted from table to table. Confusion flickered across her face. And then Ethan Carter, billionaire, innovator, and self-proclaimed cynic of love, took a step toward her, ready to say the words that would change both their lives forever. Olivia Bennet was not having a good day. Her morning had started before sunrise, as it always did. The relentless pressure of running her late mother's flower shop meant there was never truly a moment of rest. Bills had been piling up for months, customers were scarce thanks to yet another luxury retail chain opening nearby, and to top it off, her delivery van had broken down 2 blocks away from this very cafe. Desperate to fulfill her last delivery of the morning, she had resorted to carrying the flower arrangement by hand in a large cardboard box, trudging through the wet sidewalks of Manhattan. Her intention had been simple: drop off the arrangement and move on with her day. But the moment Olivia pushed open the heavy wooden door of the Velvet Bean, her instincts whispered that something was off. She felt it before she saw it, the way conversations lulled, the subtle tension in the air, the sudden shift of attention as though the entire cafe had collectively turned toward her. Olivia glanced around, brow furrowed, fully aware of how out of place she appeared among the patrons adorned in tailored suits, designer dresses, and polished shoes. Her sneakers squeaked slightly on the marble floor, announcing her presence in the most embarrassing way possible. Clutching the box tighter, she scanned the elegant interior, looking for the receptionist or counter to ask where the delivery should go. Then she noticed him. A man had risen from his table, a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. With piercing gray eyes that locked onto hers like a magnet. His jawline was sharp, his posture composed yet undeniably purposeful, and the way he walked toward her was both terrifying and mesmerizing. For a split second, Olivia wondered if she had walked into the wrong place. Perhaps this was some kind of high-profile event, or worse, a mistake that was about to end with her being asked to leave. Her grip on the box tightened, and her pulse quickened. "Excuse me," the man said, voice deep and smooth, with just enough authority to make it sound less like a question and more like a statement of inevitability. "Are you free right now?" Caught off guard, Olivia blinked rapidly. "The Velvet Beam, right?" "What?" I mean, I'm here to deliver flowers. This is." The man nodded slowly but did not glance away. "It is. But that is not why I'm asking." Behind him, two other people, an elegant blonde woman with a tablet in hand and a sharply dressed man who looked like he had just swallowed a lemon, were watching the interaction unfold with expressions of disbelief. "I'm sorry, but, what is going on?" Olivia asked, her voice wavering between confusion and growing discomfort. Her eyes darted around, half expecting someone to jump out with a camera and yell that this was part of some hidden prank show. The man took another step closer, hands slipping into his pockets as though preparing for a negotiation. "Let me start over," he said. "My name is Ethan Carter." The name hit her like a brick. She recognized it instantly. Anyone who lived in New York, or frankly, anywhere in the United States, knew the name. Ethan Carter. Billionaire. Tech magnate. One of the most influential men in the country. Her jaw slackened slightly. "Wait, the Ethan Carter?" He nodded once, calmly. "The same." For a brief moment, Olivia was certain this had to be some kind of hallucination caused by exhaustion. Billionaires did not approach flower delivery girls in high-end cafes. Not unless they were complaining that the bouquet was the wrong shade of white. Ethan glanced back toward his table, then returned his gaze to Olivia with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "About 60 seconds before you walked through that door," he continued, "I made a statement. A very serious one." Olivia narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Okay. I told the people at that table." He gestured behind him. "That I would marry the first woman who walked through that door." For several seconds, her brain refused to process the sentence. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You, what?" "I said I would marry the first woman who walked through that door," Ethan repeated, as calmly as if he were discussing the weather. "And that woman is you." Silence. The kind of silence that feels physical, heavy, like the air itself became thick enough to drown in. Olivia's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as her mind fought to assemble words into coherent sentences. Is this a joke? Are there cameras? Where are the cameras? There are no cameras. Ethan replied, tone unwavering. Serious. No joke. No setup. I am completely. Her laughter was immediate, high-pitched, and edged with disbelief. People don't do that. Billionaires don't do that. You can't be serious. They do. Ethan corrected. If they are me. Behind him, The blonde woman buried her face in her hands, groaning audibly. Love of, this is insane. Ethan, for the... Insane? Olivia echoed, her voice rising. What this is? This is beyond insane. This is... I don't even know. Ethan remained composed. I understand this sounds absurd. But I am a man of my word. I said. I would marry the first woman who came in, and I meant it. Her head shook rapidly. No. Absolutely not. I don't even know you. This is ridiculous. I agree. He said, startling her with the admission. Exactly what we need. It is ridiculous. But sometimes, ridiculous is. Olivia gaped. You trying to prove a point? Did you hit your head this morning? Is this some billionaire boredom thing? No. No games. No publicity stunt. His voice softened slightly. I am just, tired. Tired of people pretending to care about me when all they care about is what I represent. I made a choice, an impulsive one, granted, but a choice nonetheless. And here you are. She stared at him, trying to read his face, searching for cracks in the mask, any hint of mockery. Or deceit. But there was nothing. Just sincerity wrapped in absurdity. I don't even know what to say. She stammered. Say yes. He offered, as easily as if he were suggesting coffee instead of matrimony. Her laugh turned nervous. No. No, I'm not saying yes. Who even are you? I mean, yes, I know who you are in the news, but who are you really? And why in the world would you marry a total stranger? Because. Ethan said, voice dropping to a quieter, almost vulnerable tone. Stranger is better than marrying someone who only pretends to love you. Maybe marrying a... Olivia's heart skipped for reasons she could not explain. She should be running. She should turn around, walk out that door, and never set foot near this cafe again. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps madness, held her in place. Look. She said finally. I don't know what kind of day you're having, but I have deliveries to make. I have bills to pay. I don't have time for this. Ethan nodded slowly, as though expecting that answer. Then let me make it simple. Let me buy you coffee. One conversation. You owe me that much, for fate deciding you should walk through that door. She stared, incredulous. I don't owe you anything. Fair point. He conceded. Contracts. Then consider it, curiosity. One conversation. No commitments. No. Olivia shifted the box in her arms, debating with herself. Logic screamed at her to walk away. But curiosity, the dangerous, reckless kind, whispered otherwise. Fine. She sighed. One coffee. One conversation. And then I'm gone. Ethan smiled, genuine and faintly amused. Deal. As he led her toward the table, half the cafe continued watching, jaws slack and eyes wide. Witnessing the start of something that none of them could yet understand, but that would soon become one of the most talked about stories in New York City. The walk from the entrance to Ethan's table felt longer than it had any right to be. Olivia was hyper-aware of every gaze that trailed her, every whispered conversation that started as soon as her back passed. Her sneakers, damp from the drizzle outside, squeaked against the marble floor, sounding impossibly loud in the relative hush of the upscale cafe. Her hands tightened around the cardboard box, as if the familiarity of her delivery job could somehow anchor her in this wildly unfamiliar situation. Ethan pulled out a chair for her, a gesture that would have seemed chivalrous in any other context but now felt bizarrely formal given the absurdity of what was unfolding. Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second before setting the box down carefully beside her seat and sliding into the chair. Her spine remained stiff, her arms crossed protectively in front of her. Seated across from her, Ethan leaned forward slightly, hands clasped on the polished oak table. His expression was calm but unwavering, the intensity in his gray eyes refusing to soften. "I know what you are thinking," he began, his tone surprisingly gentle. "You are wondering whether I am serious, whether this is some kind of twisted joke or social experiment." She snorted. "You think?" Ethan allowed himself a faint smile, but there was no humor behind it. "I assure you, I am entirely serious. I made a promise to myself in front of witnesses. I will marry the first woman who walked through that door. And that person is you." Olivia shook her head, disbelief still wrestling for dominance over every other emotion. "Why would you do something like that? People don't, they don't just decide to marry strangers." "Why? People," Ethan replied, "spend years searching for love and still end up with strangers. Strangers they think they know. Strangers who turn out to love the idea of them, or their money, or their influence, but not them. I am tired of the pretense. I have tried dating. I have tried setups, online apps, blind dates. They all end the same." She frowned, skeptical but unable to deny the twinge of truth in his words. "What? A lottery? Russian roulette, but for marriage? So your solution is? Call it what you like," he said, voice even. "And I do not believe in coincidences. But the fact remains. You walked through that door." Olivia leaned back, arms crossing tighter, trying to put distance between herself and the insanity sitting across from her. "You are insane. You realize that, right?" "Perhaps," Ethan admitted without hesitation. "The patterns that keep us miserable. But sometimes it takes a little insanity to break." She stared at him, genuinely at a loss for words. Her eyes darted briefly to the two people still seated at the table, Ava, whose carefully curated composure was unraveling by the second, and Lucas, who looked one coffee spill away from cardiac arrest. "I can't believe this is happening," Olivia muttered under her breath. Ethan nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the weight of the situation. "Neither can I. And yet, here we are." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft clinks of porcelain cups from distant tables. Ethan waited, his gaze steady, giving her the space to process without pushing further. Olivia, for her part, tried to steady her breathing, to convince herself that this was just some strange dream or prank that would unravel any second now. But the longer she sat there, the more real it felt. "You don't know anything about me," she finally said, her voice softer but laced with steel. "You don't know where I am from, what I do, what I believe in, what I've been through. You don't even know my name." Ethan nodded once. "You are right. I do not. But that can change." She narrowed her eyes. "You want to marry me without knowing my name?" "I do," he replied evenly. "But that does not mean I do not want to learn it." Against her better judgment, against every screaming instinct in her body telling her to run, she exhaled sharply. "Olivia. Olivia Bennett." Ethan's lips curved slightly at the edges, as though committing it to memory. "Olivia. A beautiful name. And you are completely serious about this?" she asked, still searching for cracks, for some indication that this was all a stunt, a manipulation, anything. "Completely." She ran her hands through her damp hair, mind spinning. It's absurd. It is reckless. It is insane. Probably. Ethan admitted without flinching. But sometimes absurd is what the universe throws at us when the usual ways no longer work. And what? You just expect me to say yes? To marry you? Just like that? No. Ethan said, voice softer now. Not immediately. I am not asking you to marry me today. I am asking you to agree, to consider it. To give me the chance to show you that perhaps this crazy idea is not so crazy after all. A breath she had not realized she was holding escaped her in a sharp exhale. And if I say no? Then you walk away. Ethan said simply. No strings. No obligations. You finish your deliveries. Go back to your life, and this becomes just a strange story you tell your friends someday. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. She had expected pressure, manipulation, some high-powered sales pitch disguised as romance. But what she got was choice. Ethan gestured toward the untouched coffee in front of her. Vows. No pressure. Just coffee. Start with coffee. No contracts. No. She glanced at the cup, still steaming gently, then back at him. Take a break anyway. She muttered. You are lucky I was planning to. A genuine smile touched his lips, the first she had seen that did not feel calculated. I am. Olivia sighed, resigned more to her own reckless curiosity than to anything else. Fine. Coffee. Ava groaned, muttering something under her breath about career suicide, while Lucas looked like he was mentally drafting legal waivers at lightning speed. Neither of them mattered in that moment. As Olivia reached for the cup, her fingers brushed against the porcelain, warm and grounding. She lifted it slowly, eyes never leaving Ethan's. But just so we are clear, she said, voice firm. This does not mean I am agreeing to anything beyond coffee. Ethan nodded, lifting his own cup in a subtle toast. Understood. They sat like that for a moment, two strangers tethered together by fate, impulse, and a decision so ridiculous it defied logic. Around them, the world kept spinning, oblivious to the fact that something extraordinary had just begun. Her walls were still up. Her skepticism remained a shield. But beneath it, something unexpected stirred, a question, a curiosity, a dangerous flicker of what if. Neither of them realized it yet, but the moment Olivia Bennet walked through that door, both their lives had shifted irreversibly off course. And no amount of logic would ever be able to explain what happened next. For a few moments, the conversation between Olivia and Ethan fell into a strange rhythm. Almost normal in its cadence yet weighted by the enormity of what lingered between them. Olivia stirred her coffee, watching the swirling patterns in the liquid as though it might somehow offer answers to the storm of thoughts crashing inside her mind. Across from her, Ethan maintained a steady composure, his fingers interlaced on the table, his posture relaxed but entirely focused. She had expected him to retract the offer, to backtrack or admit it was some offhand joke taken too far. But no. Ethan Carter remained as calm and composed as if this kind of proposition were an everyday occurrence in his world. That alone was enough to both unnerve and intrigue her. You are serious about this? Olivia finally said, her voice softer now but edged with disbelief. You really would marry a complete stranger just because of a statement you made on impulse? Ethan nodded, his gray eyes unwavering. Correct. That is something. She muttered, glancing down at her hands, her nails short and practical. From years of working with flowers and soil. Do you even realize how crazy this sounds? Perfectly. Ethan replied without hesitation. That change everything. But then again, sometimes it is the crazy decisions. She huffed a breath, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Convince me it is romantic. You say that like you are trying to. I am not trying to convince you of anything, he said, leaning slightly forward. I am offering an opportunity. Nothing more. No pressure. No manipulation. You are free to walk away at any point. His voice was steady, grounded in a kind of sincerity that disarmed her more than any charm or flattery ever could. It was the lack of pressure that made the whole thing feel more real, and somehow more dangerous. Olivia's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you hoping to get out of this? Be honest. Ethan exhaled, his expression softening just a fraction. I am tired of superficiality. My entire life has been measured in numbers, net worth, investments, stock prices, mergers. Every person I meet approaches me like a puzzle to be solved, a prize to be won, or worse, a bank account to be accessed. I wanted something real. Or at least, something untouched by all of that. And you think marrying a random stranger is the answer to that? Not necessarily the answer, he admitted. But maybe, a beginning. Olivia studied him, silent for several long seconds. She searched his face for signs of insincerity. For any crack in the stoic exterior that might reveal hidden motives. But all she found was a strange kind of vulnerability buried beneath his polished demeanor. It was unsettling. It was confusing. And it was oddly compelling. Still, instincts honed from years of scraping by in a world that did not hand out miracles told her to tread carefully. Look, she said, pushing the coffee cup aside. I do not know what kind of fairy tale nonsense you think this is, but my life is not some romantic comedy. I have responsibilities. Real ones. A flower shop that is barely staying afloat. Bills I can hardly pay. A mountain of problems waiting for me the second I step outside this door. I understand. Ethan replied, his voice losing none of its steadiness. Abandon your life. I do not expect you to. She laughed bitterly. Everything. You say that, but marrying you would be exactly that, abandoning. Not necessarily. Ethan said, leaning back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. The opposite. In fact, quite. Olivia blinked. What is that supposed to mean? It means, he explained, his tone still infuriatingly calm, that this does not have to be a traditional marriage. It does not have to look like what everyone else expects. Think of it as an agreement. A partnership. A contract, if that feels safer. We get to know each other. We spend time together. We figure out whether this completely ridiculous idea has any legs. Her eyes narrowed further. You are proposing, what, exactly? A trial marriage? Call it whatever you like. Ethan said. The point is, there is no rush to stand in front of a judge. Or a priest tomorrow. This begins with us deciding whether it is something we want. Together. She let out a breath, pressing her fingers against her temples. This is insane. Perhaps. Ethan agreed. Tonight? But tell me this, what do you have to lose by having dinner with me? The question hit harder than she expected. Because, truthfully, what did she have to lose? Another night spent fighting with the books in her tiny office above the flower shop. Another evening spent worrying about how to stretch her rent payment without sacrificing supplies. Another few hours reminding herself that her mother's legacy was slipping through her fingers. No matter how hard she tried to hold on. I I do not even know you. She finally said, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. Then let's change that. Ethan replied, softer now. Promises. Just dinner. Let's start with dinner. No contracts. No. A long silence stretched between them, during which Olivia's thoughts raced in circles. This was the kind of moment people joked about in movies, the kind of wild, impossible thing that only happened in books or to people who were nothing like her. And yet, here it was. Real. Tangible. Staring her directly in the face. Her gut twisted. Her practical side screamed to say no, to walk out, to put as much distance between herself and this madness as possible. But another part of her, a quieter, more dangerous part, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was something here worth exploring. Even if only to confirm that it was as ridiculous as it seemed. Olivia straightened her spine, drawing a slow breath. Fine. She said, surprising even herself. Dinner. One dinner. No promises. No commitments. And definitely no marriage. Ethan smiled, a slow, genuine curve of his lips that softened the sharp lines of his face. Agreed. And after that? Olivia added quickly, holding up a finger. Sounds, I walk away. If I decide this is as insane as it. Absolutely. Ethan nodded, entirely serious. Ava let out a dramatic sigh from the other end of the table, muttering something about needing a drink, while Lucas looked like he was mentally rewriting Ethan's will in preparation for the scandal he was certain would follow. But neither Olivia nor Ethan paid them much attention anymore. Something unspoken had settled between them, a fragile, tentative truce born from curiosity, desperation, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest spark of something neither of them was ready to name. As the conversation wound down, Olivia glanced at the clock, realizing that her morning delivery schedule was now thoroughly wrecked. But for the first time in weeks, maybe even months, the knot of dread in her chest had loosened just a little. Enough to make space for something new. Something terrifying. Something that might just change everything. She stood, gathering the box back into her arms. Text me the details. She said, pulling a business card from her back pocket, the one with her flower shop's number handwritten in the corner. Ethan accepted it, fingers brushing against hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. I will. With one last glance over her shoulder, Olivia walked out of the cafe, the brass door swinging shut behind her with a soft, definitive click. And as it closed, neither of them realized that nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. The day felt heavier than usual as Olivia made her way back to her flower shop. The streets of Manhattan pulsed with their usual chaotic rhythm, but for once, her mind was not focused on dodging pedestrians or avoiding speeding taxis. Her thoughts were entirely consumed by the surreal encounter that had just unfolded. Every step echoed with the absurdity of it. She had sat across from Ethan Carter, the Ethan Carter, and agreed to have dinner with him. Not just any dinner, but one that followed one of the most bizarre proposals she had ever heard in her life. Back inside her small flower shop, the familiar scent of roses, lavender, and eucalyptus greeted her like an old friend. The cluttered space, with its mismatched shelves and chipped counters, was her sanctuary. Her mother had built this place from nothing, pouring her heart into every bouquet and every customer who walked through the door. Losing this shop would mean losing more than just a business, it would mean losing the last tangible piece of her mother's legacy. Olivia set the cardboard box down on the counter and exhaled deeply, pressing her palms against the worn wooden surface. She glanced around, taking in the half-finished arrangements. The mess of receipts piled near the register, and the wilted stems in the corner bucket waiting to be cleared. This was her world. A world of chaos, beauty, and constant struggle. She ran a hand through her hair, shaking her head. "What am I doing?" she muttered to herself. As if saying it out loud might offer clarity. But no clarity came. Only the relentless whirl of questions with no answers. As the afternoon wore on, Olivia found herself unable to concentrate. Normally, the rhythm of arranging flowers, the snip of scissors, the careful placement of blooms, the art of balancing color and texture, brought her peace. But not today. Every time her hands reached for a stem, her mind wandered back to Ethan's eyes, steady and sincere, to the way he had spoken without a hint of doubt, and to the unsettling realization that, beneath the absurdity, there was something heartbreakingly honest about his offer. Her phone buzzed against the counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Dinner at 7 o'clock. The address is attached. Let me know if that works for you. Ethan." Olivia stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. She could still back out. No. One was forcing her to go. But something about the encounter had burrowed into her mind, refusing to let go. Against every rational thought screaming inside her, she typed back, "I will be there." The reply came seconds later. "Looking forward to it." By the time 7 o'clock approached, Olivia stood outside a sleek, modern restaurant tucked away from the main streets. Its floor-to-ceiling glass windows revealed an interior bathed in soft, ambient light, with minimalist decor that was both intimidating and beautiful. She tugged at the sleeves of her cardigan, suddenly self-conscious about her choice of clothes: simple black jeans, a white blouse, and the same worn sneakers that had carried her through the day. Before she could second-guess herself further, the door opened, and Ethan stepped out. He was dressed more casually than she expected: dark jeans, a tailored blazer over a gray shirt, but somehow still looked every bit the billionaire he was. "You came," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah," Olivia replied, swallowing the nervous lump in her throat. "I said I would." He nodded and gestured toward the entrance. "Shall we?" Inside, they were led to a quiet table in a private corner, away from the main dining area. The waiter greeted Ethan by name, further reminding Olivia just how different his world was from hers. They ordered quickly, Ethan choosing a steak, Olivia opting for pasta, and then, suddenly, the reality of sitting across from him again settled in. Ethan broke the silence first. "I want to be transparent with you, Olivia. If we are going to explore whatever this is, I think it is only fair that we know each other's truths. The good and the bad." She nodded cautiously. "All right. You go first." His gaze flickered downward for a moment, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I grew up in a house where love was transactional. My parents were business partners more than anything else. They stayed together for the sake of image, for the company, for the money. My father was cold, demanding, impossible to please. My mother, well, she was more interested in charity galas and social climbing than in parenting." Olivia listened, surprised by how raw his words were. She had assumed Ethan's life had been all privilege and ease, but hearing him now, it was clear that money did not shield anyone from emotional wounds. "When I was 17, I left home. Built my first company in a rented basement. I told myself I would never be like them. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I had become exactly what I swore I would not: someone whose entire existence revolves around work, success, numbers. And yet, none of it fills the emptiness. His eyes lifted, meeting hers. That is why I made that ridiculous statement in the cafe. It was not just impulsiveness. It was desperation. A way to break the cycle. To force something real into a life that has felt anything but. For a moment, Olivia said nothing. The weight of his honesty pressed against her chest, leaving her unsure how to respond. She wrapped her fingers around the water glass, grounding herself before speaking. I get it, she said finally, voice softer now. Not the billionaire part, obviously. But the rest. Yeah. I grew up watching my mom run that flower shop. She worked herself to the bone just to keep the doors open. She believed in beauty, in making people happy, in giving something meaningful to the world. And then, she got sick. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through. She passed away 2 years ago. Since then, I have been trying to keep the shop running. But it has been hard. Rent keeps going up. Customers are fewer. The neighborhood is changing. Every day feels like a fight to hold on to. Something that feels like it is slipping away. Ethan's gaze softened. I am sorry. Me too. Olivia whispered. But it is more than that. I guess. I am scared. Scared of losing the shop. Scared of losing the last piece of her I have left. And maybe, scared that I have tied so much of my identity to something that is dying. They fell into a silence that was not uncomfortable, but contemplative. Two people from vastly different worlds, sitting at the same table, discovering that pain, fear, and loneliness did not discriminate based on bank accounts. When the food arrived, they ate quietly at first, both processing the depth of the conversation. But slowly, the tension eased. They began sharing stories, Ethan about his disastrous attempt to cook Thanksgiving dinner for his employees one year, Olivia about the time she accidentally delivered a bouquet meant for a funeral to a wedding. Laughter came easier now, filling the space between them like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time since they had met, it felt less like an arrangement forged from madness and more like two people finding unexpected comfort in each other. As the evening wore on, Olivia realized something that unsettled her even more than the proposal itself. She liked being around him. Despite the ridiculousness, despite the wealth. Despite everything, they understood each other in a way few others could. And that realization terrified her. Because it meant that the line she had drawn between them, the line that kept her safe, separate, detached, was already beginning to blur. The days following their dinner unfolded in a way Olivia had not anticipated. What began as an absurd proposition started morphing into something increasingly real. Ethan, to her surprise, was a man of his word. He texted, he called, and he showed up, always on time, always with a presence that was impossible to ignore. At first, Olivia thought it would fade quickly, that reality would eventually crash down and dissolve whatever strange connection they were building. But it did not. Ethan visited her flower shop the very next day, arriving without any entourage, without the ostentatious fanfare that usually accompanied people of his status. He simply walked in, rolled up his sleeves, and asked how he could help. Olivia was too stunned to answer at first, but then laughter overtook her, followed by the reluctant acceptance that, somehow, this was actually happening. Their days became a peculiar blend of two worlds colliding. In the mornings, Olivia taught Ethan how to prune roses, arrange bouquets, and handle irritable customers who wanted exotic flowers out of season. In the evenings, Ethan introduced Olivia to parts of his world, a world of High-rise meetings, investment calls, and luxury dinners with influential figures whose names Olivia had only ever heard whispered on the news. It should have felt like oil and water, but instead, there was something about the stark contrast that made each experience richer. Olivia, for the first time in years, felt a kind of exhilaration beyond the day-to-day survival that had consumed her life since her mother's death. Ethan, meanwhile, began seeing colors in a world he had previously only viewed in shades of gray, each petal, each scent, each simple conversation grounding him in ways his wealth never could. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. The first hint of opposition came subtly. A sharply worded email from Ethan's legal team warning him of the potential risks this unvetted personal relationship could pose to his corporate stability. It was couched in legalese, full of words like liability, reputational risk, and asset exposure. Ethan dismissed it with a simple reply, noted, "Proceed as discussed." But the resistance did not stop there. 2 days later, as Olivia was finishing a midday delivery, she found herself face to face with someone she instantly recognized, even though they had never met. Vanessa Harper stood on the sidewalk in front of the flower shop, arms crossed, designer sunglasses perched atop her head, blonde hair sleek and perfectly styled. Her presence was not just striking, it was imposing. Vanessa was everything Olivia was not. Tall, poised, dressed in a tailored outfit that probably cost more than Olivia's entire inventory. But it was the expression on her face that sent a chill down Olivia's spine, a mix of disdain, amusement, and something sharper. Something predatory. "You must be Olivia," Vanessa said, her tone syrupy with just enough venom to make Olivia's skin crawl. "And you are?" Olivia asked, refusing to show the nervous flutter in her chest. "Vanessa Harper." "Ethan's, well, I suppose you could say his former fiancée," she replied, letting the word linger in the air like smoke. "I thought it was time we met." Olivia tightened her grip on the box in her hands. "I am busy. If you have something to say, say it." Vanessa's smile widened. Straight to the point. "How charming. I just wanted to offer you a bit of friendly advice. This thing you are doing with Ethan, it is not going to last. He gets bored. He always does. And when he does, people like you get hurt. People like me." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "You know." Vanessa gestured vaguely. "Small-town girls with big dreams. Thinking they have stepped into a fairy tale. But trust me, darling, the clock always strikes midnight." Olivia set the box down slowly, squaring her shoulders. "Is that all?" Vanessa tilted her head. "For now. But just remember, Ethan belongs to a world with rules. And people like you. You are just passing entertainment." Without waiting for a reply, Vanessa turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Olivia standing there, fists clenched, heart hammering. But Vanessa was not the only storm brewing. Inside Ethan's corporate empire, murmurs had grown into full-blown discussions. Investors were restless. Board members were skeptical. Rumors that Ethan was throwing his future away over a random woman spread like wildfire. Some whispered about potential instability. Others outright threatened to pull funding if Ethan continued with what they perceived as reckless behavior. Ava stormed into Ethan's office one afternoon, slamming her tablet onto his desk. "This is a disaster waiting to happen," she snapped. "Your stock dipped 3% this morning. Because some gossip site leaked photos of you helping Olivia arrange peonies." "Peonies?" "Ethan. Ethan leaned back, unfazed. So. Ava's jaw tightened. So the narrative is out of control. Investors are calling me non-stop. They think you are having a breakdown. They think you are about to jeopardize everything we have built. Lucas, who had followed Ava in, threw his hands in the air. There are prenups to consider. Asset protection clauses. This is not just about your personal life, Ethan. This affects the company, the shareholders, the employees. You cannot just marry a florist you met on a whim. Ethan's eyes darkened. Watch me. Ava groaned, pacing. This isn't about whether you can. It's about whether you should. Look, I am your friend. I have stood by you through scandals, through hostile takeovers, through lawsuits. But this is something else entirely. You need to think about the bigger picture. I am. Ethan said, his voice steady. For the first time in years, I actually am. But even as he spoke, Ethan could feel the walls closing in. The pressure from every side. Mounting. His phone buzzed relentlessly, lawyers, board members, media inquiries, family members he had not heard from in months suddenly reaching out with thinly veiled concern that masked their true motives. And through it all, there was Olivia. Unaware, for now, of just how many forces were aligning against her. Against them. But it would not stay hidden for long. Because in a world where money dictated narratives and power shaped realities, love was often seen not as a sanctuary, but as a threat. The tension that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface reached its inevitable boiling point when Ethan arrived at Olivia's flower shop late one afternoon. The heavy brass bell over the door jingled as he stepped inside, but unlike his previous visits, there was a shadow behind his usually composed expression. Olivia looked up from the counter where she was assembling a bouquet of sunflowers and lavender, her hands pausing mid-motion. You look tense, she observed, narrowing her eyes as she studied him. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You have no idea. Without waiting for an invitation, he crossed the room and leaned against the counter, folding his arms. For a moment, the familiar scent of flowers and the soft hum of the shop grounded him, reminding him that this place was far removed from the cold, calculating world he spent his life in. What happened? Olivia asked, wiping her hands on a towel and stepping closer. Vanessa. Ethan said simply, the name itself tasting bitter on his tongue. And not just her. My board. My investors. Even some of my so-called friends. They are all, let's say, less than thrilled about recent developments. Olivia sighed, already suspecting as much. I met Vanessa. Ethan's head snapped up. When? 2 days ago. She showed up here. Tried to warn me off. Said I was just passing. Entertainment. That you always get bored. His fists clenched, jaw tightening. I am going to handle her. Olivia shook her head. You don't have to. I handled it. But Ethan, is this what it is going to be? Like? Constant pushback from every direction. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked around the counter, closed the distance between them, and cupped her face gently between his hands. His touch was surprisingly tender for someone known to be ruthless in the boardroom. I never expected this to be easy, he said softly. But I also never expected to care this much. Olivia's breath hitched, her fingers instinctively reaching up to rest against his wrists. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Ethan replied, pressing his forehead lightly against hers. I spent years thinking success was the answer. That if I built enough, achieved enough, I would be fulfilled, whole. But it never worked. And then you walked through that door. And suddenly, the noise started to quiet. Her throat tightened, working to pull us apart. Ethan, this isn't just about us anymore. There are people actively. Then we fight. He said simply. You. I don't care what it costs me. I'm not losing this. I'm not losing. Olivia pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. That's not a skirmish. That's a war. Are you sure? Because fighting them. I've fought bigger wars for less important things. Ethan replied, a determined glint in his gaze. I'm not walking away. For the first time since this whirlwind began, something solid settled in Olivia's chest. A certainty. She hadn't expected to find in him, a man whose world was built on risk calculations and profit margins. But here he was, choosing something entirely intangible, entirely irrational. Her. The following days became a test of resolve. Ethan began making public appearances. Deliberately different from what the press had come to expect. He was photographed helping Olivia at the flower shop, delivering bouquets to customers, and even standing behind the counter with an apron that read, Floral Apprentice. Social media exploded. The narrative shifted from scandal to fascination, though not without resistance. Paparazzi camped outside the shop. Articles speculated whether this was a publicity stunt, a midlife crisis, or some elaborate bet. Comment sections were a battlefield between skeptics and hopeless romantics. Some accused Olivia of being a gold digger, others painted Ethan as a manipulative billionaire toying with an innocent woman. Ethan ignored it all. He showed up at board meetings with a calm defiance that unsettled even his most seasoned colleagues. When questioned about his distractions, he responded with clear, measured words. My personal life is not a distraction. It's a decision. And it's mine to make. When investors raised concerns about stability, Ethan offered them transparency. I have not missed a single deliverable. Not one contract has been compromised. If anything, I am more focused now than I have been in years. But behind closed doors, the resistance became more aggressive. Threats of lawsuits if his actions were perceived to harm shareholder value. Subtle suggestions that he consider stepping down from his own company. An emergency meeting was scheduled by the board. Thinly disguised as a quarterly review but intended as an intervention. It was during one of those tense evenings that Olivia received an anonymous envelope slid under the door of her shop. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Candid shots of Ethan with women from years past. Lavish parties. Headlines about past flings. Accompanying the photos was a note typed in bold letters. This is who he really is. Don't be naive. Olivia stared at the contents, her heart pounding, not because she believed it, but because it was a stark reminder of how far people were willing to go. She knew Ethan had a past. Everyone did. But this wasn't about truth. It was about manipulation. She paced the shop, hands trembling slightly. Should she confront him? Should she pretend she never saw it? The weight of doubt pressed against her ribcage, but beneath it, something stronger pushed back, trust. A fragile trust, yes, but trust nonetheless. When Ethan arrived that evening, Olivia didn't hesitate. She laid the photos out on the counter. Without a word. Ethan's jaw tightened as he scanned them, but his eyes remained steady. They're grasping at straws, he said, voice low but controlled. Every one of these was years ago. Before any of this. Before you. I know. Olivia replied, crossing her arms. But they think this will scare me. Does it? He asked, his gaze sharp but tinged with vulnerability. Olivia walked around the counter, stood in front of him, and reached for his hand. Does piss me off? No. But it. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding escaped him in a quiet laugh. He squeezed her hand, pressing it to his chest. Then we keep going. Together. She affirmed. That night, they drafted a plan, not for damage control, not to appease the board or silence the media, but for themselves. A plan to move forward, on their terms. Ethan proposed introducing Olivia formally to his closest allies within the company, those he trusted. He suggested public appearances not for image but to reclaim the narrative. We don't hide. He told her, his voice steady as stone. We live. Loudly, unapologetically. As dawn began to peek over the Manhattan skyline, Olivia realized something profound. The man who had once seemed like the embodiment of cold wealth was anything but. Beneath the billion-dollar empire, beneath the carefully curated image, was a man who was terrified of loneliness, tired of emptiness, and willing to risk everything for something real. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth fighting for. The momentum they had built together felt unstoppable. For days, Ethan and Olivia continued pushing forward, ignoring the noise, the headlines, and the disapproving stares that followed them like persistent shadows. They walked through the storm hand in hand, heads held high. Both pretending that the pressure would eventually subside if they simply refused to let it dictate their story. But storms have a way of intensifying just when you think the worst has passed. It began with a phone call, one Olivia almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but instinct told her to pick up. A smooth, polished voice greeted her on the other end. Olivia Bennett, the woman asked, her tone overly polite, edged with something Olivia couldn't immediately place. Yes. Who's this? I think we should meet. There are things you deserve to know about Ethan Carter. Things he won't tell you himself. The immediate surge of defensiveness rose in Olivia's chest. I'm not interested in gossip. Oh, it's not gossip. The voice said smoothly. It's truth. Documented. Proven. Meet me at the rooftop lounge at the Halcyon. Noon. If you care about your future, you'll come. The line went dead before Olivia could respond. Her first instinct was to delete the call from her mind, pretend it never happened. But as the minutes ticked by, unease grew. A knot formed in her stomach, tight and relentless. Against her better judgment, curiosity won. Or perhaps it wasn't just curiosity. Perhaps it was fear, the creeping fear that this whirlwind she'd been swept into was built on a foundation less stable than she wanted to believe. At noon, she stepped onto the rooftop lounge. The panoramic view of Manhattan did little to calm her nerves. Sitting at a table near the glass railing was Vanessa Harper, legs crossed. Sunglasses perched atop her head, her presence exuding the kind of cold elegance that demanded attention. I had a feeling you'd come. Vanessa purred as Olivia approached. Olivia sat but kept her distance. Say what you have to say. Vanessa smiled, sliding a sleek black folder across the table. Inside, you'll find records. Financial statements. Private communications. Documents that link Ethan directly to a campaign to manipulate public sympathy by staging a romance with someone relatable. Olivia's fingers trembled as she opened the folder. Pages of correspondence between PR firms, legal teams, and corporate consultants spilled out. There were memos discussing narrative Control. Strategies to humanize the brand. And, most damning, contracts outlining staged relationships with clear financial incentives. At the bottom was a draft agreement, unsigned, bearing her name. She flipped through in disbelief. Her vision blurred, a ringing filled her ears as Vanessa leaned back, studying her with predatory satisfaction. Of course. Vanessa continued, inspecting her nails. This. Why would he? Why ruin the perfect little fairy tale? He probably never intended to show you. Olivia's voice was a whisper. No. This isn't real. Oh, it's very real. Vanessa said, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. He's playing you. Just like he's played everyone else. You're nothing more than a tool to salvage his public image after that shareholder scandal last year. Did he tell you about that? About the lawsuit settlement? About how the board nearly voted him out? Olivia shook her head, unwilling, unable to believe it. But the papers in front of her didn't lie. Cold, sterile words on glossy pages told a story that felt like a knife twisting in her chest. I thought you deserved to know. Vanessa said, standing and gathering her purse. Our world, darling. You either play the game, or the game plays you. Welcome to. Olivia sat frozen long after Vanessa left. Her fingers clenched the edges of the folder, knuckles white, jaw locked. Her heart pounded so violently it felt like her ribs might crack beneath the force. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to believe there was some explanation, some reason. This wasn't what it looked like. But doubt seeped in like poison. Every tender moment. Every glance. Every promise. Was it all scripted? Had she been naive to think someone like Ethan Carter, a man whose entire life revolved around controlling narratives, could ever truly be sincere? By the time she made it back to her flower shop, the folder was still clutched in her arms like a burning weight. Ethan was already there, crouched behind the counter organizing fresh inventory, smiling when he saw her step inside. Hey! He greeted, oblivious to the storm about to hit. I was thinking we could stop. Olivia snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. She threw the folder onto the counter between them. What is this, Ethan? His smile faltered, confusion knitting his brow as he glanced at the documents. Then realization dawned, and with it, something else, something close to fear. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice suddenly low, cautious. Answer me. Olivia demanded. Some calculated way to make yourself look better. Is it true? Is this what this has all been? Some PR stunt? Olivia, no. It's not. Don't lie to me. Her hands trembled as anger and heartbreak collided in her chest. Contracts ready. You were planning this before you ever met me. You had. It's not what you think. Ethan tried, stepping around the counter, but Olivia backed away. Yes. The company had discussions, my team brought proposals to me months ago about cleaning up my image after the board issues. But I never agreed to this. I never signed anything. I never intended. Then why does this exist? Olivia's voice broke. Why is my name even on it? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, jaw clenched. Because they assumed, they planned. But I never authorized it. When I made that statement in the cafe, it wasn't because of this. It wasn't because of them. It was real. Tears threatened to well in Olivia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to believe any of this is real when you live in a world where everything is manufactured? Because you have to trust me. Ethan pleaded. Company. Me. You know me. Not the press. Not the... Olivia shook her head, stepping back toward the door. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I was just a fool. I thought I did. I thought, maybe. But... Olivia, please. No. She said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. Figure out whether any of this was ever real. I need space. I need time to... Ethan didn't try to follow her as she pushed the door open and stepped into the street. He stood, frozen in place, watching the woman who had become his anchor disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, Ethan Carter, man who controlled empires, dictated markets, and bent reality to his will, realized there was one thing he couldn't command. He couldn't command someone to stay when their heart was breaking. The city had never felt colder, never felt more hostile. Olivia walked aimlessly through the streets, the bustling noise of Manhattan fading into a dull, indistinct hum. Her mind raced in circles, each step echoing with the same question: had it all been a lie? The conversations, the laughter, the moments of shared vulnerability, had they been scripted, fabricated, part of a larger scheme crafted in boardrooms with consultants and PR strategists pulling the strings? She hated how much it hurt. She hated that she cared this much. But the hurt was real, deep, and relentless. When she finally made it back to her apartment above the flower shop, she collapsed onto the worn couch, knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the faded photograph of her and her mother on the wall. Her mother's smile felt like a distant memory. Now, a reminder of simpler times when trust wasn't a gamble. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his office, hands gripping the edges of his desk so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He had spent his life mastering the art of control. Control over negotiations, over contracts, over empires. But now, the single thing he wanted to control was slipping through his fingers. Mark Daniels, his longtime assistant, stood silently by the window, watching the city below but stealing glances at Ethan's stormy expression. Mark had seen Ethan navigate hostile takeovers, billion-dollar lawsuits, and vicious corporate betrayals without flinching. But this was different. This was personal. She won't answer, Ethan said after yet another unanswered call. Messages. She won't even read my... She's hurt. Mark replied quietly. You can't blame her for that. Ethan rose abruptly, pacing the room. With her. They twisted everything. This was never supposed to happen. Not like this. Not. Then untwist it. Mark said simply. Ethan stopped, turning toward him. Board put together. It looks damning. You saw the documents. You saw what Vanessa and the... Mark folded his arms, his gaze steady. Who leaked it? You've beaten worse odds before. So prove it isn't. Find where it started. Who forged what? Ethan's jaw clenched. I won't let them take her from me. With a curt nod, Mark pulled out his tablet, fingers flying across the screen. Then let's get to work. They started with the internal emails. Hundreds of them. Back and forth threads between PR consultants, legal teams, and external image management firms. Ethan's security clearance gave them access to layers of data the average employee wouldn't even know existed. Mark flagged several anomalies, email chains that didn't align with Ethan's actual calendar. Documents timestamped during meetings Ethan hadn't attended, drafts of agreements that were never approved. But the smoking gun came when Mark pulled up the metadata from the contract that bore Olivia's name. The document's creation log showed it hadn't originated from Ethan's office. It had come from Vanessa's private network. Worse, the edits were made by someone inside the PR firm Vanessa personally retained during her years as Ethan's fiancée. Unbelievable. Ethan muttered, staring at the screen. Entire thing. She set this up. She orchestrated the. Mark nodded grimly. And she made sure it looked like it came from you. That's why it was waiting. That's why it was so perfectly timed the moment things got serious. With Olivia. They dug deeper. Financial trails revealed that Vanessa had paid the PR firm a substantial retainer shortly after Ethan's impromptu declaration at the cafe. Further investigation uncovered that she'd hired a private investigator weeks prior. The goal had been simple: sabotage. Paint Olivia as a gold digger, cast Ethan as manipulative, and fracture whatever foundation they were building before it had a chance to solidify. Armed with undeniable proof, Ethan didn't hesitate. He called an emergency meeting with his legal team, demanding immediate action against the PR firm and Vanessa. Defamation suits, breach of privacy, fraudulent documentation, every legal weapon at his disposal was loaded and aimed. But lawsuits would take time. Olivia wouldn't wait for court filings and verdicts. She needed the truth now. She needed to hear it from him. Ethan's first attempt was to visit her apartment, but when he arrived, the lights were off, the shop below locked, a clear message that she didn't want to see him. His calls still went unanswered. Texts were met with silence. He stood outside the shop for a long time, staring at the closed sign, running his hands through his hair, feeling the helplessness press in. Then an idea struck, not a grand gesture, not a public stunt, but something undeniably real. He went back to his penthouse and spent the entire night writing. No legal jargon, no PR spin. Just words. Raw, unpolished, and honest. The next morning, Olivia found an envelope taped to her door. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Throw it in the trash along with everything else that reminded her of him. But curiosity, despite the ache in her chest, overpowered her. Inside was a handwritten letter. No printed fonts, no expensive stationery. Just Ethan's unmistakable handwriting sprawled across plain-lined paper. Olivia. It began. I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll believe any of it. But I have to try, because walking away without telling you the truth would be the greatest regret of my life. He wrote about the chaos that followed their meeting. How the board panicked. How Vanessa, fueled by jealousy and resentment, orchestrated a campaign to destroy what they had. He included details, the metadata traces, the financial transfers, the forged documents, all evidence that what she'd been shown was a lie designed to manipulate her. But beneath all of that, the letter was filled with something more powerful than proof. It was filled with his heart. I never expected you. I never expected that a decision made in frustration would become the best thing that ever happened to me. You showed me there's more to life than numbers, more than deals and quarterly reports. You made me feel alive. And I swear to you, none of this was ever about image. Not for me. I won't ask you to trust me again easily. I know I've lost that right. But I will fight for you, Olivia. For us. For as long as it takes. By the time she reached the end, Olivia's hands were shaking. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, clutching the letter against her chest like a lifeline. 1,000 emotions warred within her, hurt, betrayal, disbelief, but also something else. Something stubborn. Something defiant. A voice inside whispering that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as broken as they seemed. But the choice wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about whether she was willing to believe that love, even when tangled in lies and sabotage, could still be real. The envelope sat on her kitchen counter long after Olivia had finished reading the letter. Her eyes scanned its contents over and over, each pass peeling back yet another layer of confusion, doubt, and fragile hope. Every line he had written echoed with something that made her chest ache, not just the sincerity, but the desperation of someone who had everything yet was terrified of losing the one thing he couldn't replace. She spent hours pacing the narrow length of her apartment, battling the war in her chest. Logic told her to walk away, to protect herself, to shield her already bruised heart. But another part of her, one that had grown louder despite every attempt to silence it, whispered that this wasn't the end. Not yet. Not if the words in that letter were true. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from the spiral of thoughts. A message flashed on the screen. Not from Ethan but from a mutual acquaintance, Ava Sinclair. The text was blunt, laced with urgency. If you care about him, come to the Carter Foundation Gala tonight. You deserve to hear the truth. All of it. No cameras. No scripts. No filters. For several moments Olivia stared at the message, weighing whether to delete it or respond. But her hands betrayed her before her mind could intervene. She was already moving toward the closet, pulling out the only dress she owned that could pass as formal, navy blue, simple. The fabric soft but unassuming. No designer labels, no glittering embellishments. Just her. By the time she arrived at the grand hall where the Carter Foundation Gala was held, the evening was already in full swing. Tall glass windows framed the Manhattan skyline, chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and the hum of polite conversation floated through the air, punctuated by the occasional clinking of champagne flutes. Olivia stood near the entrance, scanning the sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, feeling like an outsider in a world that would never be hers. But then her eyes found him, Ethan, standing at the far end of the hall near the stage, flanked by executives and high-profile donors. His posture was tense, his jaw set, eyes sharp as though waiting for a battle he knew was inevitable. Suddenly, a hush swept through the crowd as the event organizer tapped the microphone, signaling the beginning of the evening's formal address. Ethan stepped toward the podium, straightening his jacket, and took a deep breath. "Good evening," he began, voice steady but heavier than usual. "Thank you all for coming tonight. This foundation has always stood for transparency, for integrity, for building things that matter beyond profit." Murmurs of agreement echoed from the crowd, though many listened with wary eyes, no doubt recalling the recent rumors that had plagued him for weeks. "I never intended to make tonight about my personal life," Ethan continued. "But recent events have made it impossible to separate who I am from what I represent." He paused, scanning the audience, and in that brief moment, his gaze collided with Olivia's. A flicker of something passed between them, surprise, pain, and something deeper, undeniable. For weeks, narratives have circulated. Narratives crafted not by truth, but by manipulation. Some have suggested that my relationship with Olivia Bennett was nothing more than a carefully designed publicity stunt. At the mention of her name, gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Olivia felt every pair of eyes glance her way, but she held her ground. Ethan continued, voice firm. "That is a lie. And tonight, I intend to prove it." He reached beneath the podium, pulling out a folder. "What you haven't been told is that the campaign to smear both Olivia and me was orchestrated by someone with a personal vendetta, a person who weaponized the media, forged documents, and manipulated facts to serve their agenda. His voice sharpened, slicing through the tension like a blade. Vanessa Harper. A stunned silence followed. A few audible gasps. The cameras, until now politely lowered, flicked upward. Some journalists scrambled to capture the moment, whispers igniting like wildfire through the room. Ethan flipped the folder open, revealing projected images onto the screen behind him, email chains, metadata logs, timestamps. This is the proof. Communications traced directly to Vanessa's private accounts. Payments to a PR firm. Fabricated contracts. An entire false narrative constructed from desperation and spite. A sudden, loud shuffle of chairs signaled movement in the back of the room. Vanessa, dressed in a crimson gown, stood abruptly, her face draining of color. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're making this up." Ethan didn't flinch. "Am I?" He gestured to the screen. "Every document here has been verified by independent forensic analysts. Your digital signature is on every one of them. Shall we discuss the private investigator you hired? Or the off-record payments made through shell accounts?" Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line, but the murmurs from the crowd were no longer whispers. They were judgment. Outrage. Disgust. "I spent my life believing that control, over image, over narrative, over perception, was the key to survival in this world," Ethan said, turning his focus back to the audience. "But then something happened. Someone walked into my life who showed me that not everything needs to be manufactured. That some things are real, even when the world insists they can't be." His eyes found Olivia again, this time softer, less guarded. "I made mistakes. I let my world bleed into hers in ways that hurt her. Ways I never intended. But what was never fake, was how I felt. How I feel about her." The room was still. No one moved. Even the air felt heavier, charged with something electric. Expectant. Ethan stepped from behind the podium, walking toward Olivia, each step measured but certain. The crowd parted without being asked, creating a path straight to her. When he stood before her, he didn't speak right away. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I don't care who's watching," he said, voice lower now, meant only for her and the 100 silent witnesses surrounding them. "I don't care about investors or headlines or legacies. All I care about is whether you can believe me again. Whether you can believe that what happened between us wasn't chance. It was the first real thing I've had in my life in a very long time." For a moment, Olivia couldn't breathe. The entire world faded, no murmurs, no cameras, no glaring lights. Just him. Just the way his voice cracked slightly on the last word. Just the tremble of someone used to power, now completely at the mercy of a single word. "Ethan." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried, because the entire room hung on it. She could have run. She could have chosen the safe option, the guarded path. But as her gaze locked onto his, she realized that the fear of getting hurt was now outweighed by the fear of never knowing what could be. "Prove it," she said finally, her eyes never leaving his. "Not to them. To me." A slow, visible release of breath left Ethan's chest. He nodded once, solemn but resolute. "I will." The aftermath of the gala was nothing short of a media firestorm. News outlets scrambled to cover every detail of the scandal. Headlines blared across morning broadcasts and online platforms. Photos of Ethan's confrontation with Vanessa splashed over every gossip site, financial journal, and social media feed. Clips of his speech went viral, replayed endlessly with commentators debating whether it was a reckless public breakdown or one of the boldest declarations of sincerity ever seen from a man of his wealth and status. For Olivia, waking up the next morning was like stepping into a different reality. Her phone had exploded overnight, messages from friends, customers, strangers. Some offering support, others expressing shock, a few offering unsolicited advice about running now while she still could. But beneath the noise, beneath the chaos, was a single undeniable truth: something had shifted. The lie that had hovered like a storm cloud had been burned away under the weight of undeniable proof. But proof was not the same as healing. Ethan, meanwhile, wasted no time. True to his word, he began proving himself, not with grand gestures or hollow apologies, but with action. The first thing he did was fire the entire PR firm that had allowed Vanessa's manipulation to unfold unchecked. Legal proceedings against Vanessa were initiated within hours of the gala's end, and his board received a blunt message. Anyone who attempted to weaponize his personal life against him again would be met with legal consequences as severe as the law allowed. But proving something to Olivia required more than litigation. It required vulnerability, something far more terrifying for a man who had spent his life shielding himself from exactly that. By the second day after the gala, Ethan showed up at Olivia's flower shop with no entourage, no cameras, no press. Just him, holding 2 cups of coffee from her favorite corner cafe. She stood behind the counter, arms crossed, watching him approach. Her expression was unreadable, but the fact that she had not locked the door when she saw him outside was perhaps the smallest sign of progress. "I brought peace offerings," Ethan said, holding the coffee out. She stared for a long moment, then sighed and took the cup. "I'm listening. I know it's going to take more than a few speeches and coffee to fix what's broken," he began. "But I meant what I said. This wasn't supposed to happen. When I made that ridiculous statement in the cafe that day, I thought I was making a joke. A challenge to fate. But then you walked in, and it was like, the universe answered in a way I didn't expect." She glanced down, fingers tightening around the cup. "Where we left off, pretending none of this happened. And what now? You want to pick up?" "No," Ethan replied firmly. "No contracts. Just us. I don't want to pretend. I want to start over. For real. No headlines." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not as suffocating as before. Something softer had settled into the space they shared, still fragile, but no longer fractured. Before Olivia could respond, the shop door burst open. A flustered delivery driver stumbled inside, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. "You Olivia Bennett?" "Yeah," she replied, confused. He shoved a clipboard toward her. "Sign here." She scrawled her name and watched as he disappeared back onto the street, leaving behind a small cardboard box sealed with plain tape. She exchanged a puzzled glance with Ethan before carefully slicing it open. Inside was a thick envelope, and atop it, a folded note with a logo embossed in silver, the logo of the city's Department of Records. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the note and began reading. Within seconds, her brows furrowed, her lips parting in shock. "What is it?" Ethan asked, moving to her side. She held the paper out, and as his eyes scanned the contents, his posture stiffened. It was a property deed. Not just any deed, the deed to the building that housed Olivia's flower shop. The same building whose landlord had threatened eviction more than once over the last year as rent soared. Stamped, signed, and dated with a transaction finalized, less than 24 hours prior. The note attached was short. Brutal. Consider this a warning. You're not welcome in our world. Get out before things get uglier. Ethan's jaw tightened, his fist clenching at his side. This isn't possible. No one could have. He cut himself off as realization struck. His mind began connecting dots at lightning speed. The name on the transaction was obscured behind a shell company, but he recognized the pattern, the same tactics used in hostile takeovers, disguised buyouts, and silent financial aggression. This isn't Vanessa, Ethan said, his voice like steel. More to lose. This is someone bigger. Someone with. Olivia's fingers gripped the counter. Have to do with anything. But why? Why go after my shop? What does this even? Because. Ethan said, turning toward her. Matters to me. And right now, that's you. If they can't scare me directly, they'll try to hurt what? His phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another update from his legal team, but froze when he saw the caller ID. It was Mark. And the message preview was short but chilling. Check your company's holdings. Someone's making a move. A big one. Ethan's blood ran cold. He tapped rapidly, accessing his secure financial dashboard, only to see something that made his stomach twist. Blocks of stock, his stock, were being quietly sold off. Not enough to trigger public alarms, but enough to signal a coordinated effort. Enough to indicate that someone was laying the groundwork for a coup. This isn't just about us, Ethan said quietly, looking at Olivia. Completely. This is about taking me down. A fresh wave of anxiety surged, but Olivia, instead of shrinking, straightened her shoulders. Then what do we do? Ethan's eyes met hers, full of resolve. We fight. And for the first time since this entire madness began, Olivia realized something unexpected. She wasn't afraid anymore. Because standing there, shoulder to shoulder with him, no longer felt like stepping into someone else's world. It felt like building a world of their own. Together. The following days became a whirlwind of action, strategy, and determination. Gone was the uncertainty that had once lingered between Ethan and Olivia. What remained was a singular, unwavering resolve to face the forces trying to dismantle both their lives. For Ethan, this wasn't just about salvaging his empire, it was about protecting the woman who had, against all odds, become the most important person in his life. For Olivia, it wasn't about saving her flower shop anymore. It was about proving to herself that she was no longer someone who would let fear dictate her choices. They worked side by side, long hours bleeding into one another. Ethan set up a temporary operations center in the back room of the flower shop, a space once filled with vases and floral foam now occupied by laptops, legal documents, and digital charts mapping every thread of the attack against them. Olivia, who once found comfort arranging stems and blossoms, now found a strange sense of purpose in learning how to read stock movement graphs and decipher the cryptic language of corporate warfare. Mark joined them, his usual professional demeanor softening into something almost familial as he navigated between offering tactical advice and making sure Olivia didn't forget to eat during their endless strategy sessions. Ava, too, had shed her PR strategist mask, now acting more like a protective sister than an advisor, ensuring the media frenzy was contained as best as possible and carefully spinning every narrative to keep the wolves at bay. But amid the chaos, something else was happening, something slower, quieter, but infinitely more profound. The frantic pace of defending their world forced Ethan and Olivia into moments of raw honesty. Without pretense, without the trappings of their different backgrounds, they found themselves rediscovering each other, not as the billionaire and the florist, not as the public spectacle the world had turned them into, but as two people simply trying to hold on to something real. Late one night, after hours of combing through financial reports and tracing the shadow company that had purchased the deed to Olivia's shop, they collapsed onto the old, worn couch in the shop's back office. The exhaustion was bone deep, but neither moved to leave. Ethan turned his head, studying Olivia in the dim light. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, strands falling loose around her face. Her eyes were heavy with fatigue but still burned with determination. He had never seen anything more beautiful. "I never asked you something," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. Olivia tilted her head toward him. "What? Why did you stay?" His voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. "Sabotage, you could have walked away. Most people would have. After everything. The lies, She considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because, somewhere between the chaos, I realized something." Her gaze dropped to her hands, fingers absent-mindedly twisting the hem of her sweater. "I realized that the person I was when I was with you, was someone I liked. Someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Not just a struggling business owner. Not just someone trying to survive. Someone who mattered." His chest tightened. "You've always mattered. To me." A small, tired smile tugged at her lips. "I know that now." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with everything neither of them needed to say out loud anymore. By the next morning, their investigation bore fruit. Mark confirmed that the hostile maneuver wasn't from a corporate rival but from within Ethan's own board. A faction of shareholders had grown tired of his unconventional choices they deemed reckless, emotional, dangerous to the brand. The fabricated scandal with Vanessa had been just the beginning. Their endgame had always been to force Ethan out, piece by piece, starting with destroying his credibility and destabilizing his personal life. But now, armed with evidence, they had the leverage to fight back. Ethan called an emergency board meeting, but unlike the private affairs of the past, this one was public. Live-streamed. Transparent. No more backroom deals. No more shadows. Olivia stood beside him as the meeting began, not as a bystander but as someone who now had a stake in this fight. When the board members logged in, expecting yet another opportunity to corner Ethan, they were greeted instead by a barrage of evidence, financial records, emails, transactions, all pointing to their coordinated effort to undermine not only the company but also Ethan's personal life. For an hour, Ethan dismantled every accusation, every ploy, every manipulation with the precision of a master strategist. But it wasn't just logic that won the room. It was the clarity of his conviction. "I built this company from nothing," Ethan said, his voice steady. "And I refuse to let it be hijacked by people who value greed over integrity. If I have to rebuild it from the ground up, I will. But I won't compromise who I am anymore." One by one, the opposition crumbled. The remaining board members, who hadn't been part of the scheme but had been too afraid to speak, now shifted their support back to him. Legal proceedings against the conspirators were initiated immediately. And with swift negotiations, the deed to Olivia's flower shop was returned, no strings attached, every malicious contract voided. By the end of the day, the company was safe. Their future was safe. And for the first time since This whirlwind had begun, the chaos started to quiet. That evening, back at the flower shop, no longer under threat, Ethan took Olivia's hand and led her out to the small courtyard behind the building. The sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Flowers surrounded them, their scent sweet and grounding. Ethan turned to face her, holding her hands in his. When I said I'd marry the first woman who walked through that door, I thought it was just a reckless declaration. But standing here now, I know it was the smartest thing I've ever said. Olivia laughed softly, shaking her head. You're impossible. And yet, here you are. His smile softened. I don't want to make another impulsive decision. Not this time. I want this one to be intentional. Real. Because I love you, Olivia. I love you in ways I didn't think I was capable of. Her breath caught, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Ethan. So. He continued, lowering to one knee, pulling from his pocket a simple velvet box. Speeches. No contracts. No deals. Just a question. Will you marry me? No grand. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, but her laughter was bright, radiant. Then louder, more certain. Yes. 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 She whispered. As Ethan stood, pulling her into his arms, the rest of the world faded away. There were no cameras, no headlines, no boardrooms or shareholders. Just two people, tangled together in a story that neither of them could have written but both of them had chosen. A story that had led them, against all odds, to yes. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, sunlight breaking through the skyline with a warmth that felt almost symbolic. Manhattan's usual chaos seemed, for once, to quiet in reverence to a day that was destined to be remembered. But this wasn't the type of wedding expected from a billionaire. There were no lavish ballrooms, no $10,000 ice sculptures, no parades of celebrities posing for the cameras. Instead, it was something far rarer, something profoundly personal, deeply intentional, and entirely theirs. The venue was a garden nestled behind Olivia's flower shop, a hidden oasis in the midst of concrete and steel. The space was transformed with hundreds of blooms, each hand-selected and arranged by Olivia herself, alongside her closest friends. Sunflowers stretched toward the sky, mingling with wild roses, lavender, and delicate white daisies. Hanging lights crisscrossed above the guests, swaying gently in the breeze, casting a golden glow over everything. Ethan stood at the altar, dressed not in a custom tuxedo stitched in Paris, but in a simple, elegant suit chosen with care. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the overwhelming surge of something he had rarely allowed himself to feel. Joy. Raw, unfiltered joy. Around him were faces from every chapter of his life. Some from the corporate world, others from the community he had once ignored but now embraced. Even the remaining members of his board, those who had stood by him during the darkest days, were there, not as colleagues, but as witnesses to a moment of truth. The music shifted, soft and melodic, as the crowd turned their gaze toward the entrance. Olivia appeared, stepping into view, and time itself seemed to fracture. Her dress was nothing grand. By billionaire standards, a flowing gown of soft ivory, simple yet stunning, the fabric hugging her frame before trailing into a whisper of lace at her feet. Her hair was woven with fresh flowers from her own shop, strands of jasmine and tiny white blooms tucked into her dark braid. But it was her smile that stole every breath from the garden. A smile so full of love, certainty, and quiet triumph that even the flowers seemed to lean toward her. Ethan's breath hitched as he watched her walk down the aisle. In that moment, every deal, every dollar, every piece of his meticulously constructed empire paled in comparison to the simple, undeniable truth walking toward him. When she reached him, her fingers slid into his, warm and steady. Their eyes locked, and for a few heartbeats, the rest of the world ceased to exist. The officiant, an elderly woman from the neighborhood who had watched Olivia grow up, smiled. As she began, "We are gathered here not to witness a fairy tale, but to honor a reality far more beautiful. Two people who found each other in the most unexpected way, who fought for this. Who chose love in a world that often makes it the hardest choice of all." As the vows began, Ethan's voice was steady, but his grip on Olivia's hands tightened, as though anchoring himself to this moment. "Olivia," he began. "I spent my life believing that success was measured in numbers, in what I could build, what I could control. But then you walked through that door, and everything I thought I knew unraveled. You showed me that love isn't something to negotiate or strategize. It's something to choose. Every day, I choose you. I will always choose you." Tears brimmed in Olivia's eyes, her fingers trembling slightly as she spoke. "Ethan, when I first met you, I thought you were impossible, an untouchable force living in a world I could never belong to. But you proved me wrong. Not with words, but with actions. You fought for me. For us. For something real. And today, I stand here not just as someone marrying you, but as someone who understands that love is worth every risk, every leap of faith. I choose you. Always." A soft breeze rustled the flowers as the officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me, and with the blessing of everyone here, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss." Ethan didn't hesitate. His hands framed Olivia's face as he pulled her close, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was neither hurried nor staged, but tender, deep, and filled with every promise their words had barely been able to capture. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers echoing through the garden and spilling into the streets beyond. The reception that followed was less an event and more a celebration of community, of connection. Long wooden tables were set beneath the string lights, laden with food from local vendors Olivia had worked with for years. There were no five-star chefs, no Michelin stars, just honest, delicious food shared among people who mattered. Ethan moved through the crowd, no longer the untouchable billionaire but a man who laughed freely, hugged without reservation, and danced with an abandon that startled even himself. He danced with Olivia first, of course, her laughter bubbling as he spun her beneath the canopy of lights, but then with Ava, who teased him relentlessly about the lack of rhythm he hid so well in the boardroom. He danced with Mark, who mock-grimaced the entire time, and even with the neighborhood's youngest flower girl, who stood on his shoes to keep pace. Olivia, meanwhile, was surrounded by friends who had stood by her through years of struggle. Their faces alight with joy at seeing her so radiant, so unmistakably happy. Customers who had once wandered into her shop for birthday bouquets or anniversary flowers now shared toasts, clinking glasses with people who had flown in from across the world to witness something truly rare. As the evening deepened and the first stars blinked awake above the city, Ethan pulled Olivia aside, leading her toward the quieter edges of the garden. They stood together, watching the soft glow of lights, the hum of laughter fading just enough to give them space. "I never imagined this," Olivia whispered, leaning into him. "Neither did I," Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It was meant to lead. But I think, this was always where." She turned in his arms, gazing up at him. "You really believe that?" "I do," he said softly. "Every step. Every ridiculous, terrifying, beautiful step. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, breathing in the scent of flowers and the crisp night air. Around them, life continued, friends laughing, music drifting, children chasing fireflies. But in that small pocket of the universe, it was just them. Ethan Carter, the man who once said he would marry the first woman who walked through a cafe door. Olivia Bennett, the woman who had no idea that delivering flowers would change her life forever. And together, they proved that sometimes, the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most unforgettable endings. Or perhaps, not an ending at all. Just the beginning of something even greater.